I still think there's a lot of appetite in our audience, and just I'm personally curious of getting more people on the show to talk about tactically, like what are the tools and ways that they actually inspired an organization to change and improve their consumer experience. Like walk us through what you did.
I hope that we can help more consumers who are not in healthcare understand what their options are.
New choices, new players, new models of care. You know consumer-first healthcare is everywhere. For us to build the future, to see what's new, we gotta look at the world from a different point of view. Consumer innovation ain't going away. I say it's here to stay. Today it leads the way. We gotta drop the silos. We're all the same team. Experience, business, tech, and marketing. So join us now. Join the revolution. Consumer-first health is the evolution. Status quo or like status no. Yeah, this is the healthcare rap. Yo, come on, let's go.
Welcome back to the leading podcast about consumer-centered healthcare. What if healthcare was actually centered around what consumers need and expect? We're talking with leaders who are making it happen one experience at a time. I'm Jared Johnson, and wait for it, this is episode 400. Today we have the Flava of the week about what we got wrong about Consumerism 1.0. Why is it so important for us to reframe consumer transformation as an opportunity rather than a threat? And how can we use those lessons to be in the driver's seat for the next evolution? I'll talk about that. Then Zain and I record live together for the first time as we continue discussing trends from our predictions a few months ago and what we want to see more and less of in the years ahead. For the 400th time, it's time for the awesomeness. Are you ready? Let's go.
Flava of the week.
What did healthcare get wrong about Consumerism 1.0, and how can we use those lessons to be in the driver's seat for the next evolution? Go on a journey with me for a moment. Let's start with Consumerism 1.0 and its key tenet that people have more choices in their care. As we've all learned by now, that phrase comes with several asterisks. Choice only for certain specialties, choice only based on your deductible and network, choice only based on your geography, choice only based on yada yada yada. These qualifiers will continue to be true in many ways, but they're an increasingly less significant part of the discussion of how consumers engage with healthcare in the modern world. It's changing rapidly again, but the next phase isn't being driven by new tech. It's being driven by new expectations. So as that evolution unfolds, we need to understand where consumerism came from and how it got positioned incorrectly from the start. The key thing that we collectively did not understand was that Consumerism 1.0 was positioned as a threat. It was something that we reacted to. It seemed forced upon us. So naturally, incumbents hated even acknowledging it or wanting to address it, which is one reason why we still see so much resistance today. Let's remind ourselves why. By the late 2000s, medicine already had an adverse relationship with the internet. You remember the memes that got passed around of coffee mugs with the phrase, "Don't confuse your Google search with my medical degree"? Call it well-intentioned or straight up paternalistic, but the level of resistance to involving digital engagement in healthcare was about as high as it could be from the jump. So as online shopping became more popular and Googling became the answer to everything, many in medicine felt like they were losing a sense of control in their relationships with patients. Now, there was a small contingent of innovators who recognized the opportunity and were early to adopt patient reviews, online scheduling, patient education, social media, and other ways to engage and inform patients digitally long before we referred to any of that as digital front doors. But those were exceptions. And when primary care started to be offered by retail stores, drugstores, grocery stores, fitness clubs, digital health, and payviders, and especially when those names started including Amazon, Walmart, and CVS, the majority of the healthcare field responded with defensiveness and skepticism. And the more I've reflected, the more I kind of understand why. One reason is because consumerism was framed as a threat. Again, it was something for us to respond to. And what tends to be our natural response in those situations? Fight or flight, right? The adrenaline kicks in, and while that can help us escape, it usually narrows our focus to just the immediate problem in front of us. It makes it hard to think about anything besides that immediate moment. So once the threat felt like it was over, that's often where the conversation stopped. You had digital innovation and strategy teams continuing to share the virtues of addressing consumers' needs, and clinical and ops teams saying, just leave us alone and let us keep doing things the way we used to. Now, I know I'm painting with some broad strokes here. Not every team reacted in those ways. But for the most part, those teams couldn't see the opportunities right in front of them to design better products and services. They couldn't see a better way to engage in healthcare, a more consumer-centered way. So here we are today. We've lived through more than a decade of fight or flight, and the biggest lesson that I hope we learn better this time is that making healthcare more consumer-centered is an opportunity, not a threat. I've heard this process called Consumerism 2.0. I also like calling it consumer transformation, but I know that term scares a lot of people because it implies a roadmap with a lot of change management ahead. So whatever you call it, I invite you to frame it as an opportunity, not a threat, and see how we can learn from years of approaching it less effectively. Future generations in our field may count on it. Let's reframe consumer transformation as a positive benefit to our organizations and to society as we learn lessons from the past. That's another way that we'll build the healthcare of tomorrow. And that's the Flava of the week. Zain, you and I are sitting in a podcast recording booth for the first time in our lives, actually recording in the same location.
It's exciting.
All these years.
This is only our second time meeting in person. Can you believe it?
Yeah, it's hard to believe. It's hard to believe. And we look back periodically. We have our predictions episodes at the end of every year. And I think it's worth just focusing again, not just because this is our 400th episode, which, hey, that's thanks to everyone who comes on the show, everyone who listens, everyone who offers ideas on where to take this next. So that is absolutely a community celebration. That's not just for us.
Right.
And I think it's fun to look back as part of that journey and say, where do we think things are going next? Because again, when our first episode was in spring of 2021.
Yeah, I remember.
Together. And the show had been going for 3 years before that.
Yep.
In a couple of different directions, all related. But if you look back at when we were both at providers at that point, or earlier on.
Sure.
And saying, well, here's probably some things that can help health systems get further along, providing a better consumer experience. We started, I'll just kind of set the stage from my point of view here. We talked about experience and we talked about individual pieces and we talked about the tech stack that sits underneath that. How do you make that happen?
Yep.
How is something more personalized? And we saw these retailers and disruptors come in the space and looked at consumer brands that a few years before that, nobody thought. Walmart, Walgreens, CVS, Albertsons, Best Buy, and the litany of others that we've had, Kroger, so many others that we've had on the show and those that we've talked a lot about and discussed on the show have come and a lot of them have gone.
Yes.
We're kind of the post-peak disruptor entrance into healthcare. Amazon, right? There are still some players. It just looks different.
Yes.
And when we saw this wave kind of going up at that point, that was early on when you and I were just starting to do this together. And it's fascinating to look now a few years later and see where things are. The game board is shuffled again and investments are being made in different places and being recouped in others.
Yes.
I just look at overall, our goal has always been bring the consumer actual real perspective into things. That's why we say consumer-centered, because when somebody says something like Amazon in healthcare, if we're in the industry, what I've noticed is even a lot of our guests and even a lot of our colleagues, we will look at that and say, well, let me look at that from the industry perspective. So it's kind of hard sometimes to keep centered on the consumer perspective. And yes, that's what healthcare is all about, is a one-on-one encounter, either with a healthcare professional or all the times in between. So that's just to set the stage to say when we're looking a little bit bigger picture, how things have evolved. So maybe a starting point for us today is to look back at a couple of those predictions we made. It wasn't that long ago. It was just about 3 months ago, I want to say, by the time we're recording this. So what from our predictions stuck out to you? And some things are already kind of coming true.
Well, the predictions that stuck out to me, of course, were the ones that I made that turn out to be, kind of true. And so the first one was the idea that connected fitness would be the digital front door, or just the door into healthcare. And we've certainly seen additional announcements from Oura Ring and Whoop since that day. I think we made that prediction at the end of December. We also saw that Dexcom has now partnered with LA Fitness. So the gym brand, for those of you that go to LA Fitness, you can now, I'm not exactly sure what the service is, but get connected with a continuous glucose monitor to continue to optimize your health. And I remember some of the earliest predictions way back when, at least I joined the show. I remember tossing it out as a crazy idea that perhaps in the future, a health system or a health plan will own a gym. And, this Dexcom, LA Fitness is certainly a signal in that direction. if health systems want to truly start to care for their patients upstream at some point, they will have to enter the health and wellness and fitness space. That's the only way to really keep people out of the hospital. So I don't know. I think that stood true. So that was certainly one. I think the other one we talked about was around additional scrutiny coming to nonprofit hospitals relative to their tax exempt status. And so I think that might be coming into play a little bit. And, over the next year or two, I think there'll be a lot of chaos. So we'll see how it all shakes out, to say the least.
Yeah, stay tuned for all that. Another signal in the connected fitness space was the partnership with Equinox gyms and Function Health.
Yes. Sorry, I missed that. Yeah.
So for those who missed that one, that was a few months ago too, of announcing a service. So an upper end service, though, that included Function Health's testing panel, if you will. But it's not the tests themselves, it's what they tell you, and it's the actual coaching that happens with it through a service like Function.
I want to try some of that, because some of that's like HRA eligible. So with your health savings account, you can buy it, and maybe I'll try it. We'll see.
Yes. Yeah. I think
I'll come on the show and talk about it.
We have our Function listeners, reach out.
Please send us a free coupon and we'll review your product live.
Another prediction that we talked about was health systems going from a green light to a yellow light. I believe I kind of set the stage for that one. And it's interesting. I would say we're still more noise than signal here at this point, a few months later. But as you'll recall, this thought was health systems being seen as the arbiters of transformation, if you will. It's kind of more far-fetched than it used to be, of just assuming that health systems can address the health system aspects of digital or consumer transformation by themselves, by going about things the way they've always gone about them, and going about them by large committees and task forces, is that a word? That just keep going and going, and don't really have a process in sight to actually make it happen. They might be iterating and getting a little bit closer, but the gap is still widening between what they're offering and what a consumer expects. And so I think as we look at some of the signal that is coming from the market, I do like focusing on and looking for more of these things that are pointing us to a more consumer-centered or consumer-led version of health. Because like you said, if the ultimate goal is just to recognize, I think, where it doesn't work as well. This was one of the pieces, at the least, of that prediction between going from a green light to a yellow light. In other words, health systems, what does success look like for health system? Not the individual providers in a health system, but the business of it is to treat more people who are sick in their market. It's helping people be healthier or heal, but it's still treating more people that are sick. It's not preventing more people from being sick. Now, you're going to catch individual providers in any health system. Vast majority of them did go to medical school, clearly, in their training to help people live healthier lives. Yeah, like that's the conflict. So if that's at the core, how much can we truly expect a health system to be motivated to go in this direction, other than just in little bits and pieces? Our friend Victor Rice, loves to say snow melts at the edges.
Yeah, we need to talk to him. I haven't talked to him in forever.
Yeah, it's one of those where I've been thinking about that more recently, about where are those edges?
Yep.
Which are the parts, because they don't get as much notoriety, they don't get as much attention, and yet that is really where some transformation is happening. So I don't know, I can see us in terms of, if we're looking at where do we focus from here for the rest of this year, maybe, and for the next, the next 100 episodes or whatever.
500.
What's coming between here and there? I think we will see, and I will be paying attention to, at the very least, more of this signal that indicates health systems can't do this on their own. Maybe we shouldn't expect them to. So what can I, as a health-interested consumer, our other friend of the program, Jane Saracen-Kahn, health citizen, the term she uses, I love that. That indicates some level of responsibility for me to do my best to own my own health, but also recognize that my health impacts the health of those around me.
Yep.
There's so much to be said for that. So can we see some more progress along those lines? And if that is the case, let's not expect that to all come from a health system. Let's expect that to come from some of these edges, if you will, where the snow can melt. So I don't know, any thoughts on any of that?
Equinox is a great edge to see where things are coming from, or LA Fitness. I think one thing that I was thinking about in preparation for this episode is when we first started, I feel like the concept of consumer experience and some of the tools that we talk about in deriving your consumer experience was still very foreign to health systems. And now, even though they haven't fixed it, I've noticed that a lot of health system leaders are pretty conversant in and have a very specific opinion around what consumer experience means for them. And so I'm excited about that. Like, I think that health systems have moved. They understand that they understand how to define it. They understand there's a problem. Have they fixed it, or do they know exactly where to go? And maybe not. But I don't think we need to convince anyone anymore that they need to improve their CX. And so I'm excited about that piece of this. It's just moving too slow.
100%. I think that's a great way to state it all.
We used to talk about digital front door, and I don't think we need to talk about that anymore. I think people understand the concept, what it means, and so that's good. But now, getting legacy folks to actually take action and find the budgets to do so is going to be the next challenge for sure.
Yeah, well, I wonder if one piece of that is another thought that's kind of come recently, which is the fact of, you say, capital C consumerism. Consumerism 1.0, the thing we all understood over a decade ago, that you need to help guide somebody to the right person to see them, to help them. Either if it's a doctor or someone else, some other kind of healthcare professional, you need to guide them. So you need to give them info. You need to give them patient reviews. They're going to shop. The whole concept of consumerism was people are going to shop, and that's in air quotes. So yeah, there were a lot of elements of that, but then a lot got lost in translation as well. When we look back now, I see health systems still asking themselves, why do we have to do this? Like, what do we get out of participating and making it easier for somebody other than just getting them to see more patients within our health system, within our provider or medical group? And to me, from what I saw, the whole concept of Consumerism 1.0 was all kind of forced on us. So health systems had to take a reactive stance to it, and it felt like a threat. Sure. The same thing with disruptors, with consumer brands, with non-traditional brands. It was a threat. It's an existential threat at one point, it was a few years ago.
Yeah.
And you're naturally going to have a very different approach to something if it's seen as a threat from the beginning. So I wonder if we will enter a new phase here over the next year or two where health system leaders move past the threat phase and do see more opportunities for partnerships rather than only taking that defensive stance. It's really hard to innovate when you're defending.
I think they're getting there. I think any health system leaders I talk to recognize that solving for CX involves some sort of partnership paradigm they're going to have to come up with. I don't know of too many health systems that are trying to build their own tech anymore. They're looking to procure. And, obviously on this show, we've interviewed a lot of different consortiums of groups that are trying to solve things. I know we just chatted with Longitude Health and what they're trying to do in population health management. And so I'm also glad that we've moved on from that, thinking that hospital systems thinking that they can build their own thing and become, digital experts in their own right doesn't seem to be the case anymore, which I think is a good thing. And so we'll see where it goes.
I love it. Okay, so closing thoughts here. Where do you want to see us talk more about? Where do you want us to focus for the next little bit, and why?
I still think there's a lot of appetite in our audience, and just I'm personally curious of getting more people on the show to talk about tactically, like, what are the tools and ways that they actually inspired an organization to change and improve their consumer experience? Like walk us through what you did. Like, maybe you implemented a chat bot. Like, tell us who you picked and why. How did you rally an entire organization to launch this? What process did you use? What tools did you use? Like, what project management software did you use? I think a lot of folks are looking for that tactical insight to move mountains within their own institution. So I think that would actually be a good show to bring that on. And the other thing that's maybe kind of random, but just some conversations we've had at Vive, I think bringing more insight around like tech transfer and like what is protecting IP. I think a lot of health systems think that their ideas are very valuable, and certainly some of them are. But I don't think a lot of folks who have the passion to innovate fully understand that space. And so how do you protect IP? What can be sold? A lot of health systems right now are thinking about selling their data. I don't think there's actually as massive of a market for it as they think. And so I think some of that on the periphery would be helpful to our audience.
I love that. I'll add one more to that. My thought would be, I hope that we can help more consumers who are not in healthcare understand what their options are.
Yes.
And how they can plug in for something that makes sense to them, that they'll actually feel comfortable adopting in their daily lives and understand the value of whatever that is, from a nudge about updating a daily habit to understanding something like a function membership, function health, Equinox membership, whatever that is in our lives, it's going to be very different for each of us.
I agree. And maybe if there's people listening who are using some of these more modern tools and want to come on and talk about their experience and specifically how it changed their behavior or what was going on in their mind, I think that would be a great show. And then we'll send the recordings to the companies that they're using as a review.
That's right. As always, Zain, this is super fun. We'll have to do this again in person at some point. We won't take another 400 episodes to do that.
Gosh, no. Episode 400 in the books.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.